So today we're going to hopefully finish up, B'ezrat Hashem, the halachot of Netilat Yadayim. Something so simple, and yet we've found so far a lot of things to question. Now today we're going to continue with the questionings, and we're going to bring a new rule that is common amongst other parts of general halacha. It's called chatzitzah, interposition, meaning that there's a separation, something separating your skin from the water. Generally, we find this with halachot of nida, of a woman that goes to the mikveh, but it's also pertinent with regards to washing the hands, since when we wash our hands, we want to make sure that all of the water is hitting the hands. And so the general rule, the halacha is that from the Torah, that in order to become an interposition, to be a chatzitzah, it has to be on the majority of that area. In our case, since we're talking about our hands today, we're going to be talking about the majority of the hands, and it has to be something that bothers the person. The person doesn't want them to be on his hands. So if you have those two conditions, it's on a majority of the hands, and it's something that you don't want on your hands, then we say that this is a chatzitzah, and you're not allowed to do netilat yadayim with it on your hands. If someone does netilat yadayim with it on their hands, it's considered a bracha lebatala, a blessing in vain, and he has not performed the mitzvah of netilat yadayim. So that is according to the Torah. So the Torah says majority of the hands and doesn't want them to be on there. Now what happens if you have one or the other? Meaning to say, let's say for example, a woman has a henna, right? A henna, they have the coloring on the hands, and it's on a majority of the hands. But the woman wants it to be there. She likes it to be there. Or the opposite, right? What if it's on the minority of the hands, but a person doesn't really want it to be on there? For example, let's say he painted, right? So he had some paint on his hands, and now he tried to rub it off, but he got mixed up, forgot, and now he wants to go do Netilat Yadayim. He still has some paint on his hand, but it's not a majority, it's just a minority, so it's not too bad. So the question is that considered good, or can you do Netilat Yadayim? Can you not do Netilat Yadayim? So the rabbis instituted that if you have on a minority of the hands something that you don't want, or something that you're fine with it being on your hands, but it's on the majority of your hands, in those two cases, it's going to be rabbinically not permitted to do Netilat Yadayim. So really, there's no difference in this situation, because at the end of the day, we're going to say that you're not allowed to do Netilat Yadayim within those situations, and you should not bless. You shouldn't be Bracha lebatala, because the sages again say that this is something that it is not allowed. So the only case where we'll see that there is permissibility is if it's a minority of the body and the person doesn't mind. So for example, let's say nail polish, okay? So it's a minority of the body and the person doesn't mind, at least for a woman. And so therefore, we say that it is permissible for a woman, for example, to wash her hands with nail polish. But we'll see tonight that there are certain restrictions, and there are certain, even though that's the big picture halacha, we will see that it is still kind of convoluted. So, as we said, when performing the mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim, one has to make sure that there is nothing that blocks the water from touching his hands, which we call in Hebrew chatzitzah, meaning an interposition, something that's blocking the hands. If there is any substance that constitutes a chatzitzah, something that blocks the hands, then he does not, and of course he doesn't wish that it stays on there permanently, then it prevents him from performing the mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim, meaning to say, would you like some water? And it prevents him from performing the mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim. And so, therefore, if someone was to go ahead and make a blessing on Netilat Yadayim, it would be a blessing in vain. So, now we said that when we're saying that the surface of the hands, what are we talking about when we're saying the surface of the hands? Because we said it has to be majority, rov, right? So what's considered a majority of the surface of the hands? So when we're talking about the hands, it's not going to be the whole palm and all of the fingers, right? Because there are going to be times in the year where a person doesn't need to do the whole netilat yadayim on the whole hand. For example, we're having Tisha B'Av come up soon. On Tisha B'Av, you cannot wash your hands in the morning until your wrist. We say generally you want to do it until your wrist, but as we mentioned previously, that you want to try to do netilat yadayim until your wrist, but the requirement, especially on days like Tisha B'Av, is up until the knuckles. So until the knuckles. So on Tisha B'Av, when you wake up in the morning, you're not allowed to go ahead and pour water on your whole wrist, on your whole hand. It has to be until the knuckles. Because of that, we're going to say that the majority of the hand isn't the whole hand, rather it's going to be up until the knuckles. Okay? So if it's on the majority of your fingers, basically. So that's what we're going to constitute a majority of the surface is going to be a majority of the surface of the fingers. Okay? So you can take out your calculator and start calculating how much is majority in that sense. But the idea is that if a chatzitzah covers the majority of the fingers, then we say that it is a chatzitzah, it is an interposition, and you would not be able to do netilat yadayim with that problem. Yes.
Why do we only do to the knuckles? Is there, like,
on Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, one of the prohibitions of the days, you're not allowed to shower, you're not allowed to wash yourself. And so since we consider up until the wrist kind of washing, therefore we're not allowed to wash. So we do it until the knuckles, that's the bare minimum. So we go to the bare minimum. So the status of a chatzitzah, it depends on whether the person minds it having on their skin, right? So we said if the person, again, and we're going to keep bringing this so that it's in our heads, two issues with washing with the chatzitzah, with interpositions. One is it on majority? So once it's on minority, you can check off the box, you're halfway there. The second part is going to be, well, now, do I care? Do I care that it's on there? If I care that it's on there, then it's a problem, okay? But if I don't care, then it might not be a problem. What do you mean it might not be a problem? Well, because when we're saying how a person feels, it's not necessarily about how you feel. It's also about how the world feels, right? And so if most people would mind having that substance on their hand or on their skin, then it would constitute as a chatzitzah, even if that particular individual would not mind. Okay, so for example, someone deals with chickens, they have a farm, okay? So they have some dirt or some feathers on their hand, right? And they're saying, I don't mind it, I'm a farmer, I'm always, so it doesn't mind that it's still there, it doesn't bother me. Well, majority of the people in the world, it's going to bother them, okay? And so we go like a majority of the people, even though it constitutes only a minority of the hand, but because if you go ask any regular person, 98% of the world is going to say, I don't want dirt on my hands when I'm eating food. So the problem is, we're going to say that even though for you maybe it's not a problem, but for the majority of the world it's a problem, therefore we say that it is a problem and you should not do netilat yadayim until you remove that on your hand. Now in the opposite case, if most of the people would not mind, but this individual does mind, then even though we generally go with the rov, we go with the majority, and majority of people, you ask majority of people, 98% of people don't mind that they have some paint on their hand, but this guy's very, particular. He says, no, I want my hands to be completely clean. Then we say, even though majority of people don't mind, for him, he minds, and he would have to take that off. It's actually highly advisable that he takes it off. It doesn't necessarily constitute a chatzitzah 100% because there are opinions on both sides, but since there are a lot of opinions that said that it is a chatzitzah, it is an interposition, therefore you should go ahead and remove it from your hands. So in the case, for example, right, if you had someone had paint on their hands, they did a nice painting, they did a nice canvas, they did a nice painting, and then what happens is they see some paint on their hands and they start rubbing it, and it doesn't come off. And so they said, oh, you know what, majority of people don't mind. But do you mind? If you mind, then it might be an issue. It's going to be an issue, and you would have to go ahead and take it off. Now, what happens if the person is a painter? Okay. Now, the person who's a painter, majority of the time, he's going to have a lot of paint on his hand. He paints for a living, and so now for him, well, it depends. So we're going to say that you're right. 98% of the world, they don't want the paint on their hands when they're eating. But that's because most of the people in the world don't paint. So if you can break them into a subclass of individuals, and you see based on their opinion how they feel. So now let's take the painters of the world. Now, majority of the painters of the world, do they care that there's paint on their hands? Probably not. Majority of painters, especially those who paint, houses and paint all the walls and stuff, are going to say, okay, there's paint on my hand, fine. I washed it with soap and water. There's still a little bit there. Okay, that's dried paint. I don't mind to eat my sandwich. So we say that if a subgroup of people, for example, like we were talking about painters, they don't mind that the paint is on their hand, and as long as it's on a minority, then we say, even though a majority of people, 98% of people in the world don't want the paint to be on their hands, but most painters don't care, therefore we say it's not an issue. So again, if a painter, and this is not necessarily a painter, all of these kind of subgroups of people. So for example, if you have, you have a person that works with, let's say, animals, right? And again, I don't know if majority of farmers, let's say for example, a farmer, right? I think majority of farmers would be careful not to eat any food with any sweat or animal on stuff on their hands. So again, just kind of, if you can break it into a subclass. So a painter, right? A painter is usually the most common case. If you're a painter, you go ahead and paint houses. So if his hands are spotted, since we say that the majority of painters, they don't mind to have paint on their hands, again, as long as it's minority of the hand, then you're good to go. It's not considered a chatzitzah. But for a normal person, since a majority of the people would mind that paint is on their hands, therefore we do consider it a chatzitzah. So it's a good trivia question, right? A good trivia question is, you can ask at your tables on Shabbat, when is it? And you can even stump some of the rabbis. Here, you want to stump the rabbi? And you can ask the rabbi at the Ask the Rabbi, right? Ask him, when is it possible for someone to have something on his hand, and for one person it's considered an interposition, it's considered a chatzitzah, and for another person it's not considered a chatzitzah. So now he's going to be, well, I don't know. That's a good question. And you're going to, he didn't come to the shir. Okay, he didn't come to the shir. He didn't learn. So the answer is, if you have paint on your hand, right, then for a majority of people, if they're not a painter, it's considered a chatzitzah. It's considered interposition, and they would have to take off the paint before they can do netilat Yadayim. But for a painter who doesn't mind having it on the minority of their hands, therefore we say that it's not an interposition, and he can go ahead and do netilat Yadayim. Okay. We'll be talking about rings, we'll be talking about eczema and burns, all of that soon. So good questions, and we'll touch on them soon. Fingernails, okay? So if someone's fingernails are overgrown, generally we say that you should cut them, okay? And so regarding a woman who's immersing in a mikvah, the custom is to make sure that the fingernails and toenails, that they're cut short, because we fear that there might be some dirt stuck under the fingernails. And because it's a minority, but most people don't want dirt under their fingernails, therefore we say it's a chatzitzah. And so similarly here for netilat Yadayim, we say that that dirt can become a problem. We don't tell people to go to the extreme of cutting their fingernails, but we tell them to make sure that there's no dirt under their fingernails when they do netilat Yadayim. So even though you don't have to go ahead and go cut your nails before you do netilat Yadayim, but nonetheless, you should try to go ahead and make sure that the dirt is out of them. So when do we say specifically with the dirt? Specifically with the part of the nail that's overgrown, that goes beyond the skin. Usually the dirt that's in the skin, a person doesn't care too much, because at that point it's like kind of in there, and it's not going to be touching any of the foods or anything. But when it's the fingernail is a little bit longer, and you have some dirt in there, at that point it becomes an issue. And we say that, especially if the fingernails are protruding a little bit above the fingers, and there is dirt on the inside of that fingernail, then that would constitute a chatzitzah, because the majority of people would not want that to be there. So you would have to go ahead and make sure you remove any of that fingernails beforehand, and then then you would be able to go ahead and do netilat yadayim. Again, if it's inside that part where like the fingernail touches the skin, then you can go ahead and do it. But most people don't mind it there, since again it's not going to be touching the food and it's kind of stuck to the skin, so it's not really moving anywhere. Fine. Similarly, if dough is attached anywhere on the fingernail, let's say a woman was kneading dough and there's still some dough underneath her fingernail, then that would also constitute as a chatzitzah, and she would have to remove that before going ahead and doing a netilat yadayim. If someone's fingertip is infected and swollen, and taking out the dirt is painful, right? So then only the dirt that is visible when looking at the nail from the underside, meaning the one that's kind of extending on the top, that's considered a chatzitzah. You should just try to take as much as you can from that upper side, and you're good to go. So we mentioned nail polish, right? So majority of women nowadays, they like to grow their fingernails long, and then they apply nail polish on them. And in this case, we're going to say, since majority of women like nail polish on their hands, it does not constitute as a chatzitzah, because even though A, it's a minority, and B, the women don't mind that it's on there. And so because of those two things, we say, okay, it's fine. It's minority, and they want it on there, so it's not a chatzitzah. What happens usually though is when does a woman not mind the nail polish on her hand? When it's nice, when it looks good, it's polished, it's manicured, it's glossy, right? Then it looks good. The woman likes it there. What happens though when it starts getting cracked? Start getting a little there's cracks in it, or there's chips in the nail polish. At that point, some women. Majority of women wouldn't want to keep it on there like that. They would either want it to get done again, or to completely get it off. In that situation, a woman must remove the polish from her fingernails so that it doesn't constitute a chatzitzah. So for women who have that cracked nails, or get it done again, so you can always blame. You can tell your husband, "Look, listen, I'm trying to do the halacha, so I have to go get it done again. So don't blame me. It's the halacha. You know, you can't get mad at me for always doing my nails, because I just don't want to be a chatzitzah. Then I would be a bracha batala, and then all of this. Or you're going to start. It's not me. It's the halacha. Once you say the halacha, then the husband has to agree to make sure his wife's nails are always done all the time. So that's with regards to nail polish. With regards to cosmetics, if a woman applies makeup to her hand or her fingers for whatever reason, that would not be considered a chatzitzah, again, because she wants it on there, okay? Again, with the pin nail polish also, as long as it's clean, it's nice, and a woman wants it, and she wants it on there, then there's no issue. The issue is only when it starts to get cracked, stained, and tarnished. As we mentioned, henna, right? The women have also the men and women, sometimes, they have the custom of doing henna on their hands. Again, since that's coloring on the hands, and as long as it's something that a woman is okay with, all right, then we say that this is not a chatzitzah for netilat yadayim, okay? And since generally the color penetrates the skin, right, and dyes it, and we don't consider it really a separation of the skin. It's really part of the skin. So you can say similarly for example, let's say pen, right? Sometimes if someone colors with pen on their hand, it's not like the pen isn't a layer on the skin. It's kind of like at that point integrated into the skin. Similarly, like let's say someone had a tattoo, there would be no issue. That would not be considered a interposition. Okay, the next big topic with regards to interposition is rings, right? So are rings considered a chatzitzah? Generally, we see that a majority of women go and they take off their rings and they put it next to the sink, and then majority of women forget them also there, and they have to go back and get it. and then what happens is they lose them. Maybe we can circumvent this. We can somehow allow women to keep them on. So we'll see that right now. So anyone who wears a ring on his finger or her finger must remove it in order to perform a netilat yadayim, even if the ring loosely fits on, it's not completely tight, so water can go through. But this applies only to people who don't mind engaging in activities while wearing the rings. So for example, if you're kneading dough and a woman is careful to remove the ring before she kneads dough, because the dough it might get soiled, it might get ruined. So we say similarly with netilat yadayim, you would have to go ahead and remove that ring. If the person doesn't care while kneading dough or doing other types of labors for them to keep the ring on, then we say you do not need to remove them to perform netilat yadayim. That's only the case if, of course, water can penetrate. If it's very tight on the finger, then that would be an issue because the water wouldn't be able to get through. Now, if most people in the community do remove their rings while performing these tasks because they don't want the ring to get dirty, so let's say you yourself keep your ring on while you're doing kneading the dough, but a majority of the women in the community, they don't. So then, even though for you maybe you keep it on, you should go ahead and remove the ring because even though you personally do the labor with it on, nonetheless, since the majority of the community is doing it without it, so you should also go ahead and remove the ring. If a woman wears a ring, and I usually, most rings nowadays are engagement rings, right? They have a nice diamond and a nice gemstone on it, and she removes it. She generally removes it for any activity because they don't want to get it ruined. So this would be considered a chatzitzah, and she should remove it before performing netilat yadayim. If she never removes it, no matter what, even when she's kneading dough, when she's baking, cooking, whatever it may be, she may leave it on her finger while performing netilat yadayim. If most women in the community would take such a ring off, then each individual woman must take it off for netilat yadayim, even those who never remove their rings. So even though a woman herself might never remove it, nonetheless, the majority wins here. And if the majority of women would take off such a ring before performing any of these activities, then it would be considered a chatzitzah, and she must go according to the community. All these rules.
One question on that.
Yes.
So, is it that you would have to do that when you're in public, or is that also if you're in your own house? Like if you're only eating with your husband, or like your wife?
The rule applies when we're saying that we're going against the majority. That applies even if you're alone.
It applies even if you're alone.
Yeah. So no matter where you are, if you're alone and you're eating and you say, "Hey, I don't mind the ring being on my finger," but the community in which you're in right now does, and I guess you would have to do a poll. We'd have to do a public a vote before every time you go eat. Go on WhatsApp and make a WhatsApp poll. Make sure that the community votes to know, if they have an issue. But nowadays we kind of know that most women do not go ahead and, most women nowadays don't knead dough, so that might first of all be an issue there. Second issue though is most women don't engage with the rings in such activities, so we can go like the opinion, even though maybe it's a little bit strenuous on a woman, but to remove the rings, just don't forget them because that might cause even more problems. The Orli Etzion, for example, he wrote that nowadays nobody bothers to remove his ring or her ring, even if it has a gemstone, and therefore it's not necessary to take it off for netilat yadayim. But the Yalkut Yosef brings down that, as we see in our societies, most women do remove their rings at times in order to perform household chores. And so, assuming that this is the case, it's therefore necessary for all women to remove their rings for netilat yadayim, even those who don't remove their rings while performing these activities. And as we said, we're talking about women, but also with men. So if men have rings and men who wear rings, they also need to remove their ring if if the majority of the society, they take their rings off while performing dirty activities. So if he removes it when we're performing certain activities, let's say he's gardening or he's doing he's painting or whatever it may be, and he removes his ring while doing that, then he should also remove it to do netilat yadayim. If, however, a man is always engaged in a dirty activity and he never removes his ring and he's okay with it, then we say that as long as there is some space in between and the majority of men wouldn't mind, then we can say that he can go ahead and keep it on. But again, it goes against the rov, against the majority. If majority care, then he should care, and if majority doesn't care and he doesn't care, then you're good to go. If majority doesn't care and he does care, then you should remove it. If a woman had a tightly fitted ring on her finger and she forgot to remove it, or him, right, either one, and they forgot to remove it before performing the mitzvah of netilat yadayim, then the washing is invalid, and she must therefore dry her hands or his hands and remove the ring and start over. So it would this does constitute as a chatzitzah. If it's tightly fitted, for sure it would be considered a chatzitzah, even if she doesn't mind, and even if the majority doesn't mind, because at that moment when it's tight, then for sure water is not touching all of the surfaces and we have a problem. But in this case, she should not repeat the blessing. Since she did say the blessing, and since this is only a chatzitzah rabbinically, so therefore she can still save that blessing by doing netilat yadayim again and continuing on that way. And so it would not be considered a blessing in vain. As we mentioned, right, loose fitting rings, as long as the majority of people don't mind, then we don't mind. Okay. So as we mentioned earlier, with regards to people that paint, right? Also, if there's ink, if you have a shochet, someone who slaughters, a slaughterer, or a mohel, or a butcher, or a mechanic, and all of these professions, right? You have stuff that are going to be on their hands, and they don't really care for it too much. So if it's difficult to remove, and it covers less than half of the surface, right? It's minority. So we say that as long as it covers only a minority of the portion of the hands, and he does not mind it there permanently, and we're talking about, again, a subgroup of people, either a mechanic or a mohel, that it's not, again, majority of people would mind there being grease on their hand, would mind if there's blood on their hands, would mind if there's ink on their hands, but this person, or this subgroup of people, they don't mind too much, right? Then we say that it would not be considered a chatzitzah. But if it's a majority of the hands, then for sure, again, majority of the hands, majority of the fingers, then it would be for sure an issue. He would have to remove it before performing netilat yadayim. So again, for all of these kind of people, it has to be minority of the hand, and for that subgroup of people, they don't mind it. Okay. Some poskim say that for example, if you have you've used a cleaning agent, right, that removes the substances. Let's say someone has grease or tar, and they've tried as much as they can to remove it off their hands, even though he might not care at this point to eat it, right, with his hands, because he's tried as much as he can to clean his hands. He should try to clean his hands as thoroughly as possible, and therefore he should remove the substances from his hands as much as he can using these cleaning substances before performing netilat yadayim. And if any tiny amount of substance remains on the hands after thoroughly cleaning and doing as much as you can, then this is not considered a chatzitzah. So if you've ever used roofing tar, and it gets on your hand, it's black and it's stained, and it's very hard to get off. And you try to wash it off, and as much as you wash it off, it's still a little bit there, a little bit on the fingers. So if you've done as much as you can and you try to get it all off, then at that point we say it's not considered a chatzitzah, especially when you've used a lot of the creams and a lot of different agents to try removing it. At that point, we say that you are good to go. As we mentioned, dyes that penetrate the skin, and don't form a layer on the skin, this is not considered chatzitzah. The Piskei Teshuvot asks, what about if someone had something sticky like sugar or honey on their hands? Okay, he would say that since it's distinct from the skin, then he would say that it is a chatzitzah. And even if it's on the small part of the hand, a person doesn't really want honey or something like syrup on the hand because it's sticky. A majority of people don't want it, and therefore it's chatzitzah. And you would have to make sure that you get it off, you take it off before doing netilat yadayim. The Piskei Teshuvah actually cites the Chazon Ish that after reciting Kiddush, sometimes when you do Kiddush, what happens? A little bit of the wine falls on your hand. So what happens if a little bit of wine falls on your hand? You can do netilat yadayim right after? Well, a majority of people would say no, because it gets sticky, the wine or the grape juice gets sticky, and then your hands are sticky. No one wants that. The majority of people don't want that. So what do you have to do? Wash your hands, and then you have to dry your hands, and then do netilat yadayim. Now, if you see the rabbi, go ahead, and maybe not the rabbi, but next time you go to someone's house and you see them go after Kiddush, they got a little wine on their hands, and they go straight to do netilat yadayim, you say, whoa, what are you doing? You can't do that. It's a chatzitzah. You just did chatzitzah. How can you go ahead and do that? And then you explain to him the whole idea of chatzitzah, and then he says, "Wow, you're so knowledgeable. Where did you learn this from?" And then you tell him, "Well, there's a good rabbi here in Dallas." So that is with regards to syrups. That's with regards to honey. That's with regards to wine. What about hand creams? Right, a lot of people, they have creams. They like to put moisturizers or some kind of cream on their hand that it can create a layer on the skin, Vaseline, right? That will create a layer on the skin, and it would be considered a chatzitzah. Now the question is, hold on, but a majority of people, they actually want it to be on the skin, right? And so, especially if it's coming to help the skin or be beneficial to the skin, it might be a good thing. But on the other hand, it may be that this rule applies only if the person would want the substance to remain there permanently. And whereas no one wants the hand cream to remain on there permanently, he only wants it to be there for until it gets absorbed into the skin, and then it makes the skin moisturized. But the whole purpose isn't for it to be on the skin, it's for it to get penetrated into the skin. So because of this, there's a lot of argument on this, and there's sides to say on either side. A person who wants to be stringent should go ahead and make sure to not have any of these creams on their hand while performing netilat yadayim. If you went ahead and you did it, you have what to rely upon. But if you want to go according to all of the opinions would tell you best practice is to make sure none of these creams stay on the hands. If someone's hands became blackened or discolored from handling pomegranates, fruit juices, let's say they were squeezing turmeric, for example, when you're cooking, and their hands become discolored, this is not considered a chatzitzah. Again, this is kind of like ink or something that's it's not necessarily forms a layer. It's just on the skin. If you ever played with or cooked with turmeric, turmeric is like it's impossible to get it off. That's one of the things that you say, I don't know, you give up. You see turmeric, you say, okay, that's it. I know that I'm not getting that off. And so that would not be considered a chatzitzah. A dried scab. So now we're getting more into the issues of like scabs, stitches, all of these things. So a dried scab or pus that has dried around a cut on a person's skin is not considered a chatzitzah, even though technically it's removed from the skin. It's something that's beyond the skin. It's another layer. Nonetheless, we say that with regards to netilat yadayim, since it would be kind of painful to remove that scab, remove that pus, the person does not want to remove it because it would be painful. Therefore, it's fine to leave on. If it's not painful to remove, let's say it's some kind of dried up blood or dried up pus, then you should go ahead and remove it. Warts on the finger do not constitute a chatzitzah, even if the person plans to remove it. Even if he has an appointment later on that day to remove it, nonetheless, it's not considered a chatzitzah. Similarly, loose cuticles around the fingernails, those do not constitute a chatzitzah. Again, because water can reach both sides and it's not an issue. If someone has a cut on his finger and he has stitches on his finger, what are you going to tell him to remove the stitches? So we say stitches are not constituted as a chatzitzah unless you want blood around maybe the house. That might be a different issue. But we say that stitches is not considered a chatzitzah since generally they cover only a minority of the portion of the hand and a person wants them to be there because he doesn't want blood to go everywhere and he wants it to heal, right? So we say that you can go ahead and perform Netilat Yadayim. What about bandages, right? A Band-Aid. So this is the next big one that people really sometimes don't think about too much. But if someone's hand is injured and he has a bandage on his palm, or on the back of his finger, on his hand, wherever it may be, he should perform Netilat Yadayim by pouring the water onto his fingers. So if it's not on the fingers itself, and it's on the hand, and we say fine, right? Because we said majority has to be on the fingers. So you go ahead, do it on the fingers. Since you're good to go with just performing the Netilat Yadayim on the fingers. If you can go ahead and easily remove the bandage and put it back on, that would be the best thing to do. That's if it's on the palm. What happens if it's on the fingers, okay? If the bandage is on the fingers, well, we have a different issue now, okay? Because it's on the place where we need the water to hit. So the halakha is determined on what type of injury this is. If you're like my son and you just like to put band-aids on every type of cut, then at that point you should go ahead, take it off, and do Netilat Yadayim that way. Also, if he sprained his finger and has it wrapped for comfort, and the bandage is not necessarily helping, it's just there to ease the pain, then the bandage would be considered a chatzitzah, since he occasionally takes it off. So you should go ahead and take it off. If the finger is like cut or broken to the point where the bandage must remain, or it could be detrimental, it could make more harm than good, in that case the bandage is not considered a chatzitzah and you don't have to take it off. So you may pour the water on the rest of the hand and fulfill the mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim that way. He should make sure though, however, to pour at least a revi'it, to 81 milliliters or 3 ounces of water at once. Don't try to do it a little bit and then a little bit, try to do it all at once when you're doing that, since it might cause some of the other water to drip onto the other parts of the hand and make them tameh. So we say go ahead and do all at once. If the bandage itself is dirty, then after completing the mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim, he should wrap a clean cloth or a new one. In this way, that at least he'll have hygienically a good bandage while eating. So all of this applies to a bandage placed directly on the wound to keep it clean, and to hold, antiseptic ointment or something to make sure that the skin can heal, to make sure that it doesn't get worse. But if another bandage is wrapped around that one, say like 2 bandages, right? Maybe one to keep the wound in place and one kind of to make sure that the bandage doesn't get wrapped. And that outer one is over a larger area than needed, then we say that if it's easy to remove that second bandage before performing Netilat Yadayim, you should go ahead and do that, because that second bandage isn't necessarily preventing the cut from getting worse, it's preventing the prevention from getting worse. So it's another layer that's removed. You should make sure to go ahead and remove that second bandage if one is able to. If someone's hands and fingers are completely bandaged, let's say someone, not any one of us, but someone gets a cast and they, can't remove a cast, so he must perform Netilat Yadayim on the second hand alone. Okay, so if you have like a cast on the whole hand, then we don't expect him to take off the cast and then do Netilat Yadayim. So he's good to go there by doing Netilat Yadayim on one hand. Even if he's doing Netilat Yadayim on one hand, you still say Yadayim. Yadayim is plural, meaning hands. But in this case, since he's only doing it on one hand, we still use the word Yadayim. It doesn't change. The bracha, the blessing doesn't change. We still say Al Netilat Yadayim. If someone's bandage falls off while eating the meal, he has to perform Netilat Yadayim again by performing by pouring again water over the entire hand. Even if he replaces the bandage on his wound, it's best to perform Netilat Yadayim again without a blessing. Okay, so no blessing in this case. So if his bandage falls during the meal, hygienically, he should go ahead and do Netilat Yadayim again, of course, without blessing. If let's say someone needs to go to the bathroom after performing Netilat Yadayim or before performing Netilat Yadayim. So over here, there's a controversy as how exactly to do it. So generally, when we come out of the bathroom, what do? We wash our hands also. Okay. The problem is if I come out of the bathroom and I wash my hands, then my hands are clean, and then I say, let's say the after blessing of the bathroom, but then my hands are clean. So why do I need to perform Netilat Yadayim on bread? Okay. And so because of this issue, if someone uses, and generally the Ben Ish Chai, for example, brings down it's a good idea, you should go to the bathroom, try to go to the bathroom before eating a meal. It allows you to, Kabbalistically, after you've released all of the impure, you can start ingesting some of the pure energies. So it's a good idea to do that. And so therefore, what happens if someone goes to the bathroom, they've washed their hands for Netilat Yadayim, and then they not Netilat Yadayim, for coming out of the bathroom, and then now they find themselves saying, hold on a second, I need to go eat bread, so I have to do Netilat Yadayim again. But if I do Netilat Yadayim, why am I doing Netilat Yadayim if my hands are already clean? So in this situation, you have a couple different options, but the Halacha Bura of David Yosef, he brings a novel and probably the best way to do it, that way you won't forget. So the first answer is, you can go ahead, when you come out of the bathroom, go ahead, wash or clean your hands with soap, of course, and then after dry them, and then do Netilat Yadayim for the bread. Now technically, once you do the Netilat Yadayim for the bread, you can also do Al Netilat Yadayim, you can say the blessing of the bathroom. The problem is, some sages say it's best not to talk or say any blessings between washing of the hands and saying Hamotzi. Therefore, you can wait until after you say Hamotzi, say the blessing of Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. At that point, you can go ahead and say Al Netilat Yadayim. Problem with this opinion, or not, the opinion is good, right? This is a valid way of doing it. The problem isn't on the opinion, the problem is on man, right? What happens with most men and women is that once they start eating, they forget everything that they just did, and they forgot that they went to the bathroom, and they forgot that they need to do an after blessing. So because of that, it's not advisable to do that. Even if someone says, no, I'm gonna remember, once the first bite comes into their mouth and they taste that challah or they taste that bread, everything, all bets are off. They probably completely forgot where they are. So we say advisable not to do that because the person's going to forget. So what should you do? So the Rav David Yosef, he says that you should go ahead and you should do Netilat Yadayim when you come out of the bathroom without a vessel. So when you come out of the bathroom, you technically don't need a vessel like we do for Netilat Yadayim for Hamotzi. So you can open the faucet and then quickly put right, left under the faucet. At that point, you can do the blessing, the after blessing of the bathroom. At that point, though, according to some opinions, your hands are still clean. So what do you have to do? You have to go ahead and either scratch your head, touch your shoes, touch a covered part of the body, and force your hands to get dirty. Then you can go ahead and do Netilat Yadayim, a regular Netilat Yadayim for bread with the blessing, 3 on the right, 3 on the left, ala Netilat Yadayim, and then go ahead and eat the bread. So that would be the best advice with regards to that. Otherwise, you fall into some of these issues of forgetting. Okay, so that's with regards to going to the bathroom after performing Netilat Yadayim, or before performing Netilat Yadayim. Another issue is once you perform Netilat Yadayim, well, your hands are considered clean, pure. So what about other people who haven't done Netilat Yadayim? So if someone performed Netilat Yadayim, and he comes into contact with someone else's, right? So someone comes up to him, he washed his hands, Baruch Hashem, I did the blessing, I'm all good. And then someone comes up to me, I haven't seen him for a while, hi, how are you? Takes my hand, right? And so I look at him, I look at his hands, I look at him, I look at his hands, he says, hold on, you didn't do Netilat Yadayim, did you? He said, no, of course not, I didn't do Netilat, I'm going now to do Netilat Yadayim. So if he has defiled hands, and then what would happen is that you would have to go ahead and make sure that as long as your hands are dry and his hands are dry, then you're good to go. Then there's no issue, because at that point you're good to go. But if your hands were still a little bit wet, you weren't fast enough to dry all your hands before this guy came, then you would have to go ahead and repeat the Netilat Yadayim, but of course without saying a blessing. These rules, even if you accidentally, let's say, touched your other hand, let's say you're doing Netilat Yadayim, you did 3 on the right, and then for whatever reason you clapped your hands and you hurt something and you touched your other hand. So, well, this hand, your left hand, you haven't washed yet. It's defiled. Your right hand, you've washed. So because it came into contact, you have to now dry your hand and redo the Netilat Yadayim on the right hand. So this also applies if you touched a newborn infant or a child with unwashed hands. So it's recommended to be stringent and go ahead and wash your hands if they're still a little wet while you touched a child's hands or head. As far as there's a custom that we go ahead and we dry the hands of the vessel before doing Netilat Yadayim. Technically, it's not needed. You can go ahead and do it, but a lot of people say that if you want to make sure that it's done in the best procedure, you would want to go ahead, dry the handles, and then do Netilat Yadayim afterwards. It's actually recommended to dry the handles of the container before beginning Netilat Yadayim, because there's different opinions in the Gemara how these impure forces can attach. And so, since another person has washed his hands and it's wet, and you come and you're touching it with your impure hands before you even did Netilat Yadayim, you can impurify the water on that, which would impurify the hands back if you touch it. So the best thing to do is go ahead, dry the handles, and then pour, and then again make sure you're touching a handle that's dry when you're pouring it back. So that's the best thing to do. Okay, fine. We mentioned that if you have no water, then let's say there's no water in your immediate area right now, then you have to wait, if you're going in the forward direction, 72 minutes for meal, or going backwards 18 minutes, 1 meal. So for example, if you're on the highway and then you see that you just passed the nearest rest stop and it says in another 100 miles is the next rest stop, but you just passed one, so you'd have to kind of, if you could do within 18 minutes, do a U-turn and get to that rest stop and you want to eat your sandwich, that's the best thing to do. If in a situation where you know that you're incapable of getting water after 72 minutes, either going forward or backwards 18 minutes, then in that situation, when there's no way to get water, it would be necessary to wrap both hands in a cloth to eat the bread. Okay, because again, we want to make sure that we're eating the bread with Netilat Yadayim. If there's no possibility of you getting water, then you would go ahead and wrap both hands. If someone would wrap only one hand, he might accidentally touch the bread with his other hand. Therefore, we have to say that he has to wrap both hands. And it's no different than someone who has water and decides to eat only with one hand. You still have to do Netilat Yadayim on both hands, right? I'm a righty. I'm only going to eat with my right. So maybe I only have to do Netilat Yadayim on my right hand. No, you have to do it on both hands. So therefore, you'd have to go ahead and wrap both hands. If someone wears gloves, that would be considered as a cloth. Again, this only works in the situation where there's no water available, 72 minutes forward, 18 minutes backwards, and you're in a pickle, right? And so what do? At that point, you can go ahead and be lenient and use these gloves, wrap your hands in a cloth. Again, only in a situation where you're not going to be able to wash your hands within 72 minutes. Even if you're going to eat with a fork or spoon, and you say, I'm not going to come touch the bread, nonetheless, just like we said with Netilat Yadayim that you have to do Netilat Yadayim, so too over here you're going to have to wrap your hands in a cloth. If someone wants to just wrap the bread, that's not going to be enough. You have to wrap your hands. You can't just wrap it. So some people have like a plastic bag around the sandwich. That's not enough. Let's say in the situation where you don't have any water, you'd have to wash your hands. If for whatever reason one person is feeding another person, the person feeding the bread does not need to perform the netilat mitzvah of netilat yadayim, even though he's handling the bread. The person who is eating the bread would need to perform netilat yadayim. So this is another trivia question, right? When do you say that you're never going to touch the bread, and you would still have to do netilat yadayim, right? So you say, oh, if someone else is feeding you, and you have to be eaten. Or another case is where, another trivia question is, where do you find a case where someone is touching bread and another person, and a person's eating bread, but the person who's touching the bread does not need to perform netilat yadayim? That's in our case where someone is feeding another person. Of course, the person wants to make sure that who's feeding, his hands are clean, but we say that there's no obligation to go ahead and perform netilat yadayim. Okay. Fine. Now, there are opinions, and so you can go ahead and a person can wake up in the morning, and when he does netilat yadayim, at that point he can have in mind that this netilat yadayim count for him for the whole day. If a person wants to be, he knows that he's going on expedition, and he wants to make sure that he's able to eat his sandwich on the way, and he doesn't know if there's going to be water or not, so he can go ahead and make an all-day netilat yadayim, having that in mind, as long as he has guarded his hands accordingly. Meaning, he has to keep in mind that throughout the day he's not coming into contact with anything dirty. He's not touching anything that is covered. He's not touching his shoes. He's not scratching his head. So in this case, probably the best thing to do is to wear gloves. All right. At that point, you're not touching anything, and you know that definitely that the hands are protected, and you're good to go in that case. If someone is wanting to take advantage of this all-day netilat yadayim, you must verbalize your intentions. So when you wake up in the morning and you're going ahead and you're saying, listen, this is going to be my netilat yadayim for the day, so you should say, I'm doing netilat yadayim for the whole day, don't bother me, I'm going to be able to eat my sandwich whenever I want, and that's good. Now, all of this, and this is a very, very important halacha, I know we're almost at the end of time here, but you have to pay attention that all of these ideas of washing the hands, and we want to make sure that our hands are safe, does not only apply at the beginning of the meal, it also applies during the meal. Okay? So during the meal, if you go ahead and you touch a covered part of the body, you scratch your head, you touch shoes, you go into a bathroom, in all of these situations, you would have to repeat netilat yadayim, but without a bracha, without a blessing. So, for example, someone changes a baby's diaper on Shabbat, or not on Shabbat, during the meal. Usually Shabbat's when we have the meal, right? Someone has to change the diaper during the meal. So what happens? What happens at that point? Usually the hands, even though you're touching the baby's the closed parts, is usually covered parts, and so your hands would become soiled at that point. At that point, you have to go ahead and it's not enough to just wash your hands with soap and water. Of course, you have to do that, but also you have to do netilat yadayim again, as if you were doing it for bread, but without saying a blessing. Okay? And so in all of these situations, if someone, for example, was to touch mucus from their ears or nose, I don't recommend doing that, but if someone does, then he would have to go ahead and repeat netilat yadayim, and of course, without a bracha. Okay? So in all of these situations, just keep in mind that this is a halacha, and defiling the hands within especially if you want to go ahead and eat bread, then you should go ahead and wash your hands. As we mentioned also earlier, that of course if you're going to eat fruit, right, and the fruit became wet, at that point, if you've made sure your hands are guarded throughout the whole time, then you don't have to go ahead and wash netilat yadayim again. But if you again touched your hands with some of these dirty parts, you would have to go ahead and wash for netilat yadayim again without making any blessing. Some poskim ruled that someone touched skin. Maybe he took the bite and then he started scratching his head, or he scratched underneath his clothing, or touched his shoes, and the bread was still in his hand, in his mouth. So some poskim ruled that that's it. You can't swallow until you do netilat yadayim. Don't worry, that's not the halacha. In practice, since it might take for him some time to go ahead and do netilat yadayim, then he can swallow. But if, for example, it's a pretty quick trip to the sink, then he should try to follow the majority of opinions, the majority of poskim that say go ahead and wait to swallow until you've performed netilat yadayim again, just to show you the severity of touching a covered or defiling your hands before doing netilat yadayim. We're going to end it off with the last halacha of, and probably the most well-known halacha with regards to netilat yadayim, is that you're not allowed to talk during after washing the hands and going to eat the hamotzi. So everyone says you're not allowed to talk. Well, it's not so true. All right, this is Mythbusters today. So everyone always says that don't talk, but technically, it is permissible to speak or perform another task after doing the netilat yadayim and before reciting the hamotzi. It's recommended that we refrain from making any interruption, and one should try not to talk. But if someone talks, you do not have to throw a chair at them and start yelling at them. They haven't done a avera, they haven't done a sin. And so when we're saying that it's recommended to refrain from interrupting between netilat yadayim and hamotzi, ideally one should avoid even waiting long enough. So I think we mentioned this earlier, that the Rama rules that you should try to not wait as long as it takes to go 22 amod, which is around 12 seconds, 22 amod, which is around 12 seconds, okay? So we say that between doing the netilat yadayim and saying hamotzi, even if you haven't said anything, you've been quiet, you haven't really done anything, you should try to minimize the time to within 12 seconds. That's the best thing to do. Of course, if you have not, if it takes a little bit longer, that's fine. And this just shows that the person who's breaking the bread should be the last to perform netilat yadayim, because he's going to be the one that we follow this 12 seconds. The 12-second clock starts from the time that the person who is going to perform the hamotzi has performed netilat yadayim. The Zohar teaches that one should recite Psalm 23 before before saying hamotzi, and so some people have the custom of saying this Psalm 23 between the washing of the hands and waiting to say hamotzi, or before he says hamotzi. Some poskim, some halachic authorities recommend that one should recite this psalm before performing netilat yadayim. That's the best way to do it, because at that point you've done it before saying hamotzi, and also you're not running into the situation of interrupting between the netilat yadayim and the hamotzi, so that's the best thing to do. If someone has said a blessing next to you, and then, this is going to be the last one, I promise, right? If someone has said a blessing next to you, and you have to say amen, right? Everyone goes to do netilat yadayim. He says netilat yadayim. You haven't said the blessing yet. You have to say amen. So now the question comes to, what part of the washing process are you up to? Okay, if you've washed your hands and they're still wet and you haven't said the blessing yet, then you are able to go ahead and say amen. Okay, if you said the blessing but you have not dried your hands, you're not allowed to say amen. After drying your hands, you can go ahead and say amen, and this is not considered an interruption. Okay, we finished the halachot of netilat yadayim. I'll open it up to questions. Does anyone have any questions?